Hello, everyone. Today we're talking about Salman Rushdie's Trapped Inside a Metaphor speech. Before I get into this speech, let's talk about who Salman Rushdie is. Rushdie was born June 19th, 1947 in Bombay, which is now known as Mumbai, India. He was educated in Rugby School and went to the University of Cambridge, where he received his MA degree in history in 1968. Most of the 70s, he worked in London as advertising copier. Then he came up with a few novels, Grimace in 1975, Midnight Children in 1981, and Shame in 1983. But his most notable and controversial novel of all of his novels was The Satanic Verses, published in 1988. The plot focuses on two protagonists who are Indian Muslims, and they go on this plane together. Then the plane is hijacked by terrorists, and the plane explodes, and one of the protagonists descends and transforms into the angel Gabriel, and the other one later turns into the devil. And there's all these visions and trials and tribulations they go through. A lot of people in the Muslim religion found many problems with his novel and thought the novel to be disrespectful to their religion. According to staff, the Muslim critics accused Rushdie of portraying Islam as deceitful, ignorant, and sexually deviant religion. Most were outraged by his Mohound character, who was based on their prophet Muhammad, and they thought in the book it was implying that their prophet Muhammad was a false prophet, so they believed his novel to be blasphemous, especially to their religion, and his new perspective was a perspective no one thought of in the Islam religion before. So they were just outraged and surprised by his novel. It was very shocking to them how Rushdie wrote about their religion. Also in the novel, Mohound goes into a brothel and he has 12 wives that are prostitutes, which is another just disrespect for the religion and their prophet. So right after the book was released, it resulted into many angry mobs burning Rushdie's book and a bunch of signs wanting Rushdie to die due to his disrespect to the Islam religion. So February 14th, 1989, a month after his book was released, the spiritual leader of the Revolution of Iran publicly condemned the book as blasphemous and issued a fatwa, which is like a legal opinion, against Rushdie. A bounty was offered to anyone who would execute him. So Rushdie had to go down into hiding. And it wasn't until 1998, nearly a decade after his book was released, the Iranian government announced that they would be no longer seeking the fatwa against Rushdie. And I have a video to show some of the angry mobs.
30 years ago this week, the life of one of Britain's foremost writers, Salman Rushdie, was to change forever. His novel, The Satanic Verses, inspired Iran's spiritual leader, Ruhollah Khomeini, to issue a fatwa, a death warrant. He declared the book blasphemous.
The strength of feeling about Rushdie's book resulted in death threats to the author almost as soon as Satanic Verses came out.
The call to arms triggered mass protests from London to Islamabad and closed down the space for debate around Islam in a way many would say still resonates today. Rushdie embarked on a life of high security and was often in hiding.
So Rushdie had a pretty rough life after he released that controversial novel that changed his life. But during his time of hiding, he popped out for appearances here and there. On December 11th, 1991, he was asked to speak at a dinner in New York City at Columbia University, where they were celebrating the 200th anniversary of the First Amendment. And this is where the Trapped Inside a Metaphor speech was spoken. In the beginning of his speech, he describes a hot air balloon breaking, and this is like a metaphor where a bunch of people are in the balloon, but only one can be saved. He then talks about how people try to decipher who should live and who should die by their virtues and vices and their life choices. He states, "We may be born equal, but thereafter our lives are weighed differently in the scales." He applies the balloon metaphor to himself as he's been stuck for 1,000 days in his quote-unquote balloon, which it references his hiding. In the balloon, there are Western hostages in Lebanon, British businessmen imprisoned in Iran and Iraq. He believes that he would be the first to be pushed into the abyss in this hypothetical, metaphorical balloon compared to everyone else's situation. However, this mindset he describes in the beginning is too depressing, so he urges himself and the audience to think of a more positive approach and refuses to live in despair. Even though he was showed much hatred from his book, he was showed much love as well later. Um, he proceeds to explain that he learned a lot from the angry mobs burning his books, as they thought this act was holy because they thought they were doing the right thing. These mobs really upset Rushdie because he had no intent of offending anyone by his book. It was just his interpretation of a religion, and it was a fiction book. However, his heart was filled with joy when he found some readers that were moved, entertained, or even stimulated by his book, the Satanic Verses that he worked very hard on. Surprisingly, some Muslims were a fan of his book, stating, in spite of the stock's tactics, its ideas about the birth of Islam were very positive. He hopes that one day some Muslims may agree not only with his book, but the ideology of the European Enlightenment, where it demonstrates freedom of thought and precisely freedom from religious control and freedom from accusations of blasphemy. He then puts us into his shoes and describes his 1,000 days in that balloon, and quote unquote, this is also referenced into his hiding, and how the media was criticizing him, saying he should die a manly death and not hide like a rat. And people were making out Rushdie to be the devil, and how he just deserves to die. He doesn't deserve to live. In 1990, a British official assured Rushdie there was positive negotiations with the Iranians and about the fog wall. The Iranians would neither encourage nor allow citizens to act against him. Rushdie brings up the balloon metaphor again, and how he is alone, wondering if this part is this the part where he's going to be set free, just as the businessmen and the hostages later were freed. However, his hope for freedom was destroyed when the fog law was reinstated later that year after the negotiations, and heightened even more danger for Rushdie because the bounty money had doubled. United Nations had a deal against him, and killers were directly assigned to hunt and find him under the Iranian government. Despite most Muslims hating Rushdie, his goal is to be at peace with Islam, and even if he has to step out of his pride for that. He tried to connect the message to his audience that the Muslim religion is more than meets the eye, and that people of the West could not look at the stereotypical view of the Muslim religion and Muslims. Unfortunately, that was not how his message was received. He urged that Islam shouldn't be like a blind faith, but should be more interpreted and looked more skeptically. They should be more open-minded and not so strict in their view of everything being so literal. Because Muslim used to mean family and light. He mentions the 12th century philosopher Rushdie, who believes that not all words of the Quran should be taken literally. This is because some verses contradict each other, and if they were taken literally, they were not all meant to be taken literally. Some should be interpreted metaphorically. Rushdie concluded that there was no room for progressive perspective in the Muslim religion in this day and age. Also, that he has no regrets and stands by his book. He did not apologize about his book. He is still proud of it, and his intention was still pure. He never intended to offend anyone. He emphasized that not all authors agree with the things they write about that they come out of their character's mouth. He adds on to the point of his book, intending not that he did not try to offend anyone. He actually met with 6 Islam scholars in 1990 and all of them agreed that the book was not offensive. However, 5 of them turned on him, joining the angry mobs in the street. Only one stayed on Rushdie's side, saying the book was not offensive. Rushdie finally states that the book should be read everywhere and for years to come, because if it is not read, history might repeat itself and there would be no new takes on the religion. That releasing the book is a piece of history and that people should learn from it. And here are my references.